Conservatives. They believe in a small national government, states' rights, and less regulations on business. They're mainly represented by the Republican Party. Their opponents? Liberals. They believe in a large national government and that the government should regulate trade, redistributing wealth. They're mainly represented by the Democratic Party. Each philosophy has its own merits and demerits, but who is the most conservative and most liberal president? First, let's start with a basic history of American party politics, exploring the presidents as we go along. It's hard to say what early politicians would have been considered conservative or liberal by modern-day definitions. Some people consider, say, George Washington a conservative, and some consider him a liberal. You can't say one way or the other, especially since early presidents had issues way different than today's. However, there are some examples of early presidents embracing conservatism. For example, Thomas Jefferson was hesitant to make the Louisiana Purchase, which was a large land purchase that doubled America's size, because he was afraid that the federal government didn't have enough power to do that. He still went ahead with it though. Jefferson also advocated lowering or even eliminating taxes, which is also embraced by modern conservatives. Around the War of 1812, however, a drastic realignment went around. One of the main political parties, the Federalist Party, broke up, and the Democratic Republicans, which was Jefferson's party, were in power for over 25 years. Then the Democratic Republicans rebranded and became the Democratic Party we know today. However, that Democratic Party wasn't liberal. They were still widely against big government, so they could technically be called conservatives, although they saw rich people and businessmen as an enemy of the people, a theme repeated by modern-day liberals. The Whig Party formed in opposition to the Democrats as a pro-business party. That's another staple of modern conservatism. The Whig Party dissolved in the 1850s over the issue of slavery, and the Republican Party formed from the ashes of the Whigs. However, there was one new twist. Republicans were formed to oppose slavery with the goal of stopping its expansion or abolishing it. The pro-slavery Whigs joined the Democratic Party, and the third party system was born. More on that later. The first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln. He was a self-described conservative, although he did use federal power to preserve the Union during the Civil War, so liberals can also claim Lincoln. A 2017 survey of historians by C-SPAN stated that Lincoln was considered the best president. Back then, things were very different. In fact, states like California, New York, Illinois, and New England were all solidly Republican, as well as current red states like Wyoming, Kansas, and all the other mountain states. Southern states like Texas, Georgia, and Kentucky all voted blue for the Democratic presidential candidate. In this time period, about 1856 to 1896, Republicans were dominant, and conservatism was also dominant. Of course, remember, at this time, it's not like modern conservatism. Republicans just favored big business and Democrats didn't. In the period between 1896 and 1928, Republicans also dominated American politics, with the exception of Woodrow Wilson and Grover Cleveland. It's here, surprisingly, that we meet the first candidate for the most liberal president, even though he's a Republican. Theodore Roosevelt, uncle of the famed Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the trustbuster who broke up large corporations. He was also a conservationist, which meant that he protected the environment and laid restrictions on companies that polluted, something that's more in line with a modern liberal. He was a pretty effective president. On that same 2017 survey of historians, Roosevelt was ranked number 4 on the list. He was popular and the economy was strong under his leadership. However, he strengthened the military dramatically, which is one aspect of modern conservatism. A couple of presidents after Roosevelt, we get Coolidge, a candidate for the most conservative president. Silent Cal, as he was known, was the most hands-off president in American history. He believed in doing nothing and watching the economy grow. And grow it did. Under his watch, the national debt was halved, and the period under his leadership was called the Roaring Twenties, or Coolidge Prosperity. In that survey, however, he's only in 27th place. He was popular during his time, but history hasn't been kind. And don't forget, a year after he left office, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression came in. To combat the Great Depression, the American people elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You can't say he's one of the most liberal presidents, but he did dramatically increase the size of the federal government. He created the New Deal, the name came from Theodore Roosevelt's Square Deal, to combat the Great Depression. However, historians aren't sure if his New Deal ended the Great Depression or if World War II did. In the survey of historians, he's ranked 3rd on the list. After World War II ended, conservatives were getting desperate. It's 1952 and they hadn't won an election since 1928. They wanted to nominate Robert Taft, as he was known as Mr. Republican, in the election. If he won the presidency, he'd have probably been the most conservative president. However, he lost out to Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the commander of all Allied forces in World War II. Eisenhower won in landslides both times he was running, and was a successful president. He was more of a moderate and is ranked number 5 in the survey. Continuing, John F. Kennedy got elected in a close race against Richard Nixon, although he was assassinated a few years later. His replacement? Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of the most liberal presidents. A Democrat from Texas, he's famous for the Great Society and his passage of civil rights bills. He was the one that started Medicare. The economy was strong under his watch, but he was extremely unpopular near the end of his term due to the fact that he continued the Vietnam War and due to the riots after Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. He's ranked as 10th best in the survey. His successor? Richard Nixon. The man most famous for resigning in office actually had a liberal streak, though he was still a conservative at heart. To learn more about him, you can watch one of my previous videos, linked above. Moving along, we get Ronald Reagan, a candidate for the most conservative president. He believed in trickle-down economics, which was cutting taxes for the rich, and believing that the savings would trickle down to the poor and middle class. This was known as Reaganomics. Under his watch, the economy boomed and the military grew, although the national debt soared under his watch. He was popular during his time, and many conservatives still regard him as a hero today. He's rated as number 9 in the survey. It's here that politics has really become what it is today. The southern states used to be solidly Democratic, and the Northeast used to be solidly Republican. Now, that's switched. Southern states usually vote Republican, and the Northeast usually votes for the Democratic candidate. Additionally, states like California switched from going reliably red, which means Republican, to going reliably blue, Democratic. As for the more recent presidents, they've tended to be more moderate, with the exception of perhaps Obama and Trump. Barack Obama was more liberal, though since he left office relatively recently, a definitive judgment can't be made yet. The same goes for Donald Trump. He's more conservative than recent presidents, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr. Only time will tell how history judges him. So, to recap, Theodore Roosevelt and Lyndon Baines Johnson are among the most liberal presidents. Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan are among the most conservative. Those are the most liberal and conservative presidents. Be sure to subscribe and like. And thank you for watching Explained. New videos every other Friday.